dear God, Lord, we know that you're here. And that's just so exciting, Lord. That's our hope. That's our joy. So now, Lord, it's our prayer that in these moments of hearing and reflecting upon your word, God, that you'll speak into our hearts, that you'll change us if we need to be changed. And Lord, that we'll just experience your power even more here today. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, as we begin our second sermon in this series on living the life, I want to take a moment and talk about this logo that we put together for this series. How many of y'all have seen these Keep Calm logos or posters? See some hands up? Kind of become this big fad. And if you haven't seen them yet, go home and do a Google image search for the words Keep Calm. And there will be hundreds of these posters. I got a few here that I want to show you. It's everything from keep calm and go shopping, to keep calm and wait for the royal baby, to keep calm and eat a cupcake. And then, Apple has one, keep calm and think different. And there are the religious ones, keep calm and pray hard. And then here's my favorite, stay alive and avoid zombies. Right? Anything and everything you need. And if you don't find the poster you need to fit your individual circumstance, there are websites where you can type in whatever you want and it'll make your own Keep Calm poster. And that's what we did for our sermon series. This whole Keep Calm and Live the Life. Now, all these Keep Calm posters are plays off of a poster the British government made right before the start of World War II. They knew that when war broke out, it would bring a lot of hardship, a lot of destruction to the cities in England and throughout the United Kingdom. And so they wanted to boost morale. And so they made these posters. And there's one of the original examples of keep calm and carry on. It sounds so British, right? Keep calm and carry on. The idea, no matter what happens, no matter what comes in these next months and the next years with this war, whatever happens, keep calm and carry on. And now I know it's probably safe to assume that most of us here aren't citizens of the United Kingdom, and so we're not subjects to the Queen. But we do have a king. And over this 4-week series, what King Jesus is saying to us is keep calm and live the life. Keep calm and live like a follower of Jesus. And that keep calm part is crucial. If you remember last week, we talked about the story of the Good Samaritan. There's a man who was walking from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he's beaten up, he's robbed, and he's left for dead. And then 2 religious folk walk by. One, the equivalent of a preacher. And the other, the equivalent of just a good person in the pew. And when they walk by, they don't stay calm. When they walk by, they freak out. They start thinking, well, maybe the robbers are just around that bend, and if I stop to help him, he'll rob me too. Or maybe even this man's in with the robbers, and he's not actually hurt. He's just pretending to be hurt to lure me in so they can get me. But then again, what if he is hurt? What if he is dying? But what if he's already dead? And if he's dead, if I touch him, then I won't be able to go to church and help fold bulletins later today. Because in that culture, if you were to touch a dead body, you'd be temporarily considered unclean. You'd be temporarily banned from going to church. They were freaking out. They were wondering, what's going to happen to me if I stop to help him? Remember we talked about that last week. But then along comes the Samaritan. The religiously, the culturally, the whatever you want to say it, the other. Who doesn't freak out. He stays calm. He lives the life. He does what needs to be done. He stops and he binds the man's wounds and he takes him to the hotel and he provides whatever funding is needed for his extended stay in rehab. He does what needs to be done. And if you remember our bottom line last week, saying go and do likewise. When you come to suffering, when you come in the face of pain, stop. Attend to it. Do what needs to be done. Live the life of a follower of Jesus. Go and do likewise. And that brings me to a question. How many of you ever get so caught up in going and doing that you kind of forget why you even got started in the first place? Right? Like you get a project in mind and you decide, hey, I'm going to get this knocked out, and by the end you don't even remember why you started. And so even though you get the project done, you don't actually fulfill the need that it was supposed to fulfill in the first place. Does that ever happen to any of y'all, or is it just me? I'll admit, it happens to me way more than I would like to let out. But one that stands out in mind was about a month ago, on Father's Day. I got this great idea. I invite my parents to come to worship with us, and then afterwards we'd go home, we'd put on the U.S. Open, and while Dad watched the last round of the golf, I'd cook him a great Father's Day supper. thought it was a great plan. Dad thought it was a great plan. So the very next thing I did was I called my girlfriend and I said, how do I cook a big Father's Day dinner? Because, I can hold my own in the kitchen. I can do basic standard stuff. But if it gets anywhere beyond that, everything's going to be covered in flour. There'll be eggs strewn all over everywhere. It gets to be a pretty big mess. So I needed some help. So I called up Kirsten, and she quickly realized that what I needed was more than just a few recipe suggestions. And so she was very gracious. She offered to come over that day to go to worship with my family and then help me to cook the meal. And I just want to stop right here and say, isn't it good to have people in our lives who help us know our limitations? Right, and not just to know our limitations, but to help us move beyond them, to encourage us and help us work through them and teach us what we need to know. And that's what she did for me that weekend. But it wasn't just about the food. The meal turned out great. Dad loved all the recipes she found on Pinterest. We had a wonderful time eating. But then a couple days later, she called me and she said, Ryan, Father's Day was so stressful. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, we got home from church and you kind of sat your parents down in front of the TV, and then from there you were just all over the place. You were running here and there saying, well, that's going to need 5 more minutes, and that's going to take 2. Oh, we can't start that yet. Oh, we got to start that now. And then you were giving constant updates on the color of the pizza crust in the oven. And I said, well, we had to get the meal done, didn't we? She said, yeah, it was going to get done. But, you invited your parents over to spend the day with you. I mean, you could have at least, talked to them while you were cooking. But instead, you were so distracted. And I got the project done. But in the meantime, I forgot the reason why I was doing it. Invited my parents to spend time with them, and instead I just got distracted. But, I bet I'm probably in pretty good company about that. I'm sure we've all done it at one time or the other. But even more so, we're in good company because there are people in the Bible who've done the same thing. We find one of those stories in the 10th chapter of Luke. So let's see what Jesus has to say to these people who are in a situation probably not too uncommon from where we find ourselves sometimes. Now, as Jesus and his disciples went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things. There's need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. And the Bible tells us that Martha was distracted. I probably don't even need to ask, but I'll go ahead and do it. Have you ever felt distracted? Have you ever had one of those days where you wake up and you only have about 2 things you have to get done? And although you're busy all day, at the end of the day, you still haven't gotten those 2 things done? Or those days where you're just completely exhausted by the end of them, but if I were to ask you what you did, you really couldn't tell me? I know I have days like that where, in fact, I bought a book on leadership once. It was a book that had a much better title than it actually was a book, and the title of the book was Killing Cockroaches. Right? It was a Southern author, knew all about our cockroaches, and he used the analogy of killing cockroaches to describe distractions. He said, it's like you're about to start doing something, you see a cockroach scurrying by, so you run over to kill it, and then as you're about to get back to work, you see another cockroach run that way, so you run over there to kill it, and it just keeps going on all day long, and then at the end of the day, you haven't gotten your work done because you spent all day killing cockroaches. You spent all day chasing distractions. And to be honest, I never finished the book because I got distracted. It's easy to do, isn't it? We live such busy lives. We have so many different parts of our lives. We have our family life, we have our church life, we have our work life or our school life, and then we have our clubs and our volunteer things, and we have Duck Dynasty. We have all these different things that are clamoring for our attention all the time, and it's hard to focus on one thing or the most important thing because we have all these different things calling for our attention, and oftentimes there are many different good things, but they're still all calling for our attention at the same time. And do you ever feel too busy? Again, that's probably a question I don't really need to ask. And that's why it's important to note that Jesus doesn't criticize Martha for being busy, but for being distracted. And that's an important distinction we need to make, that Jesus doesn't criticize her for being busy, but for being distracted. I mean, somebody had to cook the meal. They had to eat. The meal had to get done. So Jesus isn't criticizing her for cooking the meal, but just like in the case when I invited my parents over, he's criticizing her for how she cooked the meal. She got so caught up in the task that she was distracted from and ignored her guest, who in this case was Jesus. Right? So the story of Mary and Martha isn't as simple as saying, well, Jesus praised Mary and criticized Martha, so we should just sit around praying all day and never do anything. It's not that simple. Because Jesus doesn't criticize her for cooking the meal, but for being distracted. It's not about whether or not we're ever going to do anything as we live the life as disciples. It's about how are we going to do things as disciples. It's about which things, of all of those things clamoring for our attention, which of the things are we going to do? How are we going to make those decisions? Let me offer a suggestion to show you what I mean. Let's start with church stuff. Because most of us know that churches are famous for having all of these ideas for these ministries and these activities that we want to do. And we also know that most churches are also famous for not having the budget or the volunteers to do most of the things they want to do. So we have to make decisions. Which one is most important? Which one do we want to do now? Which dream to chase? Which dream or activity to let die? Because even if it used to be effective, it's not effective anymore. It really kind of boils down to how do we as a church make sure our busyness isn't distractions? Or how do we as individuals make sure that, how do we know which ministries to support and be invested in? I want to offer a simple little litmus test. If we can't say how Jesus has called us to that ministry, if we can't say and describe how we feel led by Jesus to be in that ministry, and if we can't say how that ministry is going to bring people to know Jesus, to bring people to Jesus' feet, we probably need to give some serious thought to why we still have that ministry. And the same is true for all the things we like to bicker about in church and call them church politics. Which building do we need to renovate first, or which group should have the first priority in scheduling rooms, or which outside groups will we let come in and use the church, and anything or everything that we like to argue about in church. If you ever find yourself wanting to argue in church over something, again, I offer that litmus test. Can you say how you felt called by God to one of these things? And can you say how it will lead people to the feet of Jesus? You might think, well, great, right? That'll work for church stuff, that'll work for church politics, but that's not the only thing that distracts me. In fact, sometimes that's the least thing that's distracting me. I have many more distractions in my home life or my work life or my social life than in my church life, so what about that? I want to give you another litmus test. If you can't say how you were called by God to an activity, then you need to give some consideration to why you're still doing it. But hear me on this point. God doesn't just call us to church work. God calls us, if we have a spouse, to be a good spouse. If we have children, God calls us to be a good parent. God calls us to be a good son or a daughter or aunt or uncle or nephew or niece. God calls us to be a good friend. So doing what God calls us to do isn't just about church stuff. God also calls us to have time for rest and renewal. That's what we call Sabbath. Taking care of ourselves, finding rest, renewing ourselves. And God also calls us to a life's work. Full-time ministry isn't the only professional calling that God gives. God's calling each of us to some sort of life's work, something to devote our lives to, whether that's a profession, whether that's in the home, whether that's a life of volunteering and service. In every phase of our life, there's something God's calling us to. This isn't just about church stuff. This is about life stuff. So how do we make sure that our busyness isn't distraction? We start at the feet of Jesus. Jesus tells us to go and do likewise. Well, how many of the things that we could go and do, how do we know which ones to do? Again, if we can't say how Jesus has called us to it, we need to give some consideration to why we're doing it. We need to pray about it. So, dear God, You know, our lives can be crazy sometimes. You know, sometimes we have so much going on, and it's hard to know where to start. So we ask, oh God, that you will speak into the busyness of our life, that you'll speak through the distractions of our lives, whether that's our church life or our family life or our work life or our school life or whatever that might be, that you will speak into the midst of all of it. Help us to hear your call. Help us, Lord, to sit at your feet, to hear from you what you would have us to do. For God, you do call us to go out and live out our faith in lives of service. You call us to go out and do likewise. But God, help us to know what to do, so that in our doing we don't lose sight of you. Lord, we ask this in the name of Jesus, at whose feet we hope and we pray to stay.